Phails at philosophy. What the heck could it be? Life such a mystery. Phails.
Welcome back to Phil Phails. Phil Phails at Philosophy with Grant Potts, Philosophy Book Club. We're reading, what are we reading, Grant? Philosophy's Big Questions, comparing Buddhist and Western approaches, edited by Stephen M. Emanuel.
Yep. And it's a Sunday morning.
It's Sunday morning. Cheers.
Cheers.
You got your coffee?
Yeah, you got your ice water?
I got some ice water. It's kind of like angels and demons. This is the yin and yang. We don't have to make it good and bad.
We'll just remove any value from this.
Yeah, well,
it's
one's
just
organization
stuff that opposes other stuff.
Yeah, one's
Nothing's
brown,
more important than
one's
the other.
clear. Yeah.
Just to make that clear.
All right, we are reading chapter 5.
Chapter 5. Yeah. Is it chapter 5? No.
Can consciousness be...
No, chapter 4.
Chapter 4, Can Consciousness Be Explained? Who wrote this one?
This is Dan Arnold.
Dan Arnold.
Yeah.
And this time we're going to do
This time we actually read it.
We read it. Yeah, last time I didn't read it. But we're going to use things from our last session. We're going to throw out the book, not literally, and just wax philosophical.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
About the chapter.
Yeah.
Somewhere around, like maybe at the hour point or something?
The hour point.
That sounds good.
Before that, we're going to stick tightly to the book.
We are.
We're just going to read it sentence by sentence and comment. It's going to be amazing.
We're talking Dignaga. We're talking Vasubandhu. We're talking Dharmakirti. We're pretty much talking about all the Buddhists. The thing I noticed about this chapter, and even chapters before it, were how little comparative text there was.
Yeah, this chapter sets up, it introduces a problem that is a problem that's talked about extensively in contemporary philosophy of mind.
Yeah,
right.
David Charmer called it the hard problem.
Yeah, the hard problem of consciousness. But then it just says, yeah, and Buddhism speaks to this too.
Yeah.
And, it's an interesting journey. And like many, I think many points of philosophical argumentation, or maybe philosophical work, it's an interesting journey to prove what ends up being a rather small point, right? At the end, he basically is saying, see the problems that physicalists have with consciousness, with explaining consciousness in contemporary philosophy of mind. Idealists have the same problem. Yeah. And we can see that in Buddhism.
Yeah, idealism is just as challenging.
Yeah,
as
idealism
physical.
doesn't solve this problem.
Well, let's not start at the end.
Right.
We can't lead with the, well, we can. What is it called? Where you lead with the solution or whatever.
The solution. Yeah.
Don't bury the lead. We're not going to bury the lead, y'all. There's no answers
Is that
in this
burying
chapter.
the lead? Isn't burying the lead when you don't say it up front?
It's when you put the leads somewhere in the... I don't know.
I don't either.
I'm going to tell you, spoiler alert, this question goes unanswered. So,
Yes.
Like the 3 previous chapters, we get more questions and we get different viewpoints on this one question.
Right.
So our last session, we just kind of had a retrospective hang. Right. And I tried to read it. This time I started releasing the show and was super busy editing and all of this stuff. And I thought, man, it's been maybe a month since we did this, or maybe more.
A month or so. But yeah.
And so I thought I've got tons of time to do it. And so, when I started reading the book?
Last night?
Yesterday.
That's fine.
Yesterday.
It's one chapter. It's you can sit down for a couple hours and get through it.
Yeah, I read it. The first part was easy because I had read it before. And then yesterday I started reading it and then took a good nap. And so I think that might have been good. To have it swirling around my head. And then I woke up this morning at 3:30 in the morning or 4. and thought, I need to at least finish it once and then try to finish it again in the morning. You know what I mean? I wanted to read it twice, the end part.
So did you wake up in the middle of the night,
Mhm.
finish it, and go back to sleep?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nice. And then read it again this morning?
No.
Okay.
I was like, setting up cameras and lights and stuff.
Uh,
So I didn't read it again. But I
but
did.
you at least did your homework.
I watched videos while I was cleaning and organizing the space. I was watching videos on Vasubandhu
Nice.
and Yogacara to
Mhm.
tradition, and kind of having these ideas swirl around the room
Mhm.
and my mind.
So what do you think of Vasubandhu
Uh,
and Yogacara and everything you got off those videos?
what do I think about them?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's difficult. So, do I believe that there isn't a physical world and it's all in your consciousness? That's the only place where things live. That seemed to be where he was going, if not was all the way there, that it was everything exists in the metaphysical realm.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, well, everything that exists is mind only. Right?
Yeah, it's mind only.
We often call Yogacara the mind only school.
And so we give the binary, it's the mind only school, and that's idealists.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the existence only or physical world only, and
Physical,
those are physicalists.
Yeah.
Seems like they could have done a better job of naming their group. Spot on there. But
I don't think they had like a branding consultant.
yeah, probably not. But so we start off the chapter talking about a lot of idealism.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really know what it meant when I
Mhm.
started reading it. I was like, these guys had ideas. I think that's what all philosophers are supposed to have ideas.
Right, right,
They're idealists.
right.
And it wasn't until the end of the chapter that I realized idealism meant mind only.
Mm-hmm.
It talked about, they had a real discussion around non-dual versus dual and Buddhism. It seemed like Buddhists couldn't be dualist, which in order to be idealist, you had to be.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I think that section, it was a weird gesture because I think he was basically saying people think of Buddhists as
non-dual.
non-dualists for these reasons, and then kind of just moves on from that, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't, but I think he's trying to say it's more complicated, right? There's non-dualism, there's idealism, there's there's a variety of perspectives,
Yeah.
but we're looking here at this group.
When the Zen Buddhist went to the ball field and the vendor asked him how he would like his hot dog, do you know what he said?
Make me one with everything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Is that the joke he cites? I can't remember.
Yeah, it is.
It is. Yeah,
It
yeah.
is. It's the one where he says basically, Buddhists are non-dual.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, like, I think, yeah, I have a question. Like, how do you understand what Chalmers' problem is? Like, I'm
The hard problem?
yeah,
I
like,
watched some videos with Charmer. It seemed like, well, this question is, can consciousness be explained? That's the hard problem. But what do you mean? How are you going further than that?
right. Like, why is that a problem? Like,
Right.
what creates the problem? And I'm trying to get a sense of how someone reading this chapter who hasn't necessarily been introduced to that
Mm-hmm.
prior to it, because it, like, part of when you say it's not as comparative, what it doesn't do that some of the earlier chapters did that were comparative is actually explain the Western perspective.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, the problem that's being set
Right.
up. So I'm trying to figure out how much a deficiency that is.
Yeah. I noticed as soon as you asked me if I understood it, I felt real insecure and scared.
Right.
Do I know how to answer this question? When I look back at that and think about the problem, they talk a lot about consciousness being an experience of, what did they say? It's subjectivity.
Mhm.
That it is like this to have that experience.
Right.
The thing that I experience occurs in my subjectivity. It took me a while to kind of grasp that.
Right.
Because I'll experience the coffee cup differently than you will. It'll be an experience like holding a coffee cup,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. And like your experience of holding the coffee cup, I think that's a good way to think of it because it gives us concrete object. Because we often
Mm-hmm.
talk about it in this way that goes back to, I think we talked about Nagel's bat, what it is to be a bat thought experiment
Right, right,
last time, right? That consciousness is what it is to be you, right?
right.
But I think that can be kind of blown out and a little vague. But if you think about it as, obviously you see me holding the coffee cup,
Mm-hmm.
right? But there's an experience of holding the coffee cup that I'm experiencing that is what is me holding the coffee cup. In the
Right.
same way, there's an experience of you seeing me.
And I'm memories of me holding
Right,
a coffee cup, so I kind of
right,
understand what that means.
exactly. And that, that, and he shifts into this language at the end, that first person perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
That first person, what it is to experience the world is not something that we can actually explain,
Right.
right? We can't explain that using the descriptive analytic language we use because that descriptive analytic language is third person
Right.
in
Objective.
right. It's yeah, and I think if we think of subjective and objective not as like often when we use subjective we mean, oh, it's all liquid and relative and whatnot, but that's not what we're saying. An objective is out there and real.
What are we saying?
We're saying that we're talking about two fundamentally different ways in which we engage our understanding of the world,
Mm-hmm.
right? One is this objective third person way, which is descriptive and analytic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I describe the coffee being picked up,
Right.
etc. I even myself,
It's warm. My
right.
arm. Yeah.
But when we shift into first person language, when we say I'm picking up the coffee cup,
Yeah. Who is I? Or
well, and it's also just like what is that as and yeah, as a fundamental experience of me engaging the coffee cup.
mm-hmm.
That's not something we can explain with descriptive language, and I think part of the value of this chapter is because he goes, especially through Dignaga's arguments
Mm-hmm.
at the end around why why it's difficult to think of the object as causing
Oh, he talks
the
about cause and
perception.
effect when he
Yeah,
gets into
yeah,
rebirth stuff.
yeah. Because we can describe, like if I say, "Oh, I see the coffee cup." Let's describe how that happens. Well, the light reflects off the coffee cup.
Mm-hmm.
It hits my
I
iris. That
see the
hits the
shape
optic
because it. Yeah.
nerve. It goes into the
Yeah.
neurons. We've got this large descriptive chain.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but none of that has anything to do with me seeing
Me.
a
Right.
cup, right?
Right.
Even the objects we talk about now are all these like analytic objects of nerves and light rays and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot that we've constructed through our elaborate understanding of the world. How is it that we also see a cup as a cup? Because when we perceive, we're not seeing little light rays. We're not
Right.
we're not
We
experiencing
see
any
the
of
cup.
that. We just experience a cup,
And
right?
I think a through line for this chapter, at least in the last one, and maybe even all of the chapters, is this idea of our peripherals, our sensory, you know, sight, touch, smell, taste. These are if we were a computer, it'd be our keyboard, our
Mhm.
monitor, our mouse. And I watched a video or read about the floating man thought experiment
Tell me
where
about this.
if you're a man floating in space and you
Mm.
can't see or smell or hear or taste and notice all your limbs are stretched out so you can't feel any other thing, do you have an idea of existence or
Right,
self?
right,
It's this experiment where you take away the peripherals, you
right.
take away your sensory organs. What is there? And David Chalmer, when I watched the video on him, he was even arguing that AI. I think he was arguing this. I'm reluctant to say, but what I took away was he was saying the organization of data is where consciousness would kind of be realized or kind of unfold.
That it would emerge.
Yeah, through organizations of data. And it's that we have to bring in these sensory data, these data sets, this texture data set, the smell data set, this sight data set. We have to organize those and make sense of them, which is where a consciousness kind of becomes.
Right. Except we don't know if that's the case.
We don't know.
Right.
I mean,
And
there's a bunch of people talking about it.
Right. Well, and I mean, and that's interesting to, like, we, on a certain level, we know we're aware, right? We know we're conscious. And
But would we without all, if a computer was just sitting there, a hard drive sitting there spinning,
we wouldn't necessarily know that that's conscious. In the same way, I don't even know if you're conscious, right? On a fundamental level, the one of the characteristics of consciousness is it's fundamentally private.
Yeah.
Right? And
we are the center of all of
Right.
our universe. We have a bunch of center of universes.
right, and we have that awareness. It's very difficult to construct any kind of coherent way to operate without assuming that awareness. So I think that's as good as we get as on knowledge of it. But if we have a high threshold of what we call knowledge, right? You know, if I have certainty as my threshold
Yeah,
of
certainty.
knowledge, right?
That's where we're going.
I don't know you have consciousness. I know you present in a way that seems to reflect the way when I think of myself as a kind of third, like we have this interesting ability to project ourselves out from ourselves and say, what do I look like to other people, right?
Mhm.
You know, and I think we do that even before we look at ourselves in the mirror, right? We have this sort of sense that there are, I notice all these other human beings. They seem to behave in ways I behave.
Right.
And so they probably have consciousness. It's reasonable, right?
Right,
Like
right.
it's a reasonable conclusion that you're conscious.
Right.
But you could not be. You could be as conscious as an AI chatbot,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
We get back to that question of, are we in the matrix? Are we in a simulation?
right.
You see that? I've seen that question places, philosophical places.
Yeah, though
Are
I
we
think
sim?
it's interesting that you bring that up, because I think that part of what he suggests, because the matrix theory, the simulation theory, is almost like it's another form of idealism, right?
Everything is idea, no physicality.
Right. And there's a part of us that says, well, maybe we're in the matrix and that explains it. But it doesn't, right? Like even if we're in the matrix, we still have this problem of consciousness and how to explain it. And I think that is what's interesting about this chapter, is this sort of journey through idealism and saying, even if we assume there are no real objects that we're perceiving, right? That there is no cup, right? That it's all mental constructs on some level. And, you know, we can have an idealism that says it's all mental constructs and it's just floating in the field of mind. Or we could have an idealism that says, you know, there's stuff out there, right? There's reality out there that we don't have any direct access to. So everything we experience about the reality is a construct in the mind. Do you see the difference between those two?
Right.
One is that it's just like
it's not there, and one is it's there. It's just we will never have enough sensory peripherals to really experience it.
Right.
One is it's there. One is it's not even there.
There's no such thing as a cup. Right.
Right.
There's just an accumulation of atomic events.
We're talking about,
right.
Does reality have a ground now?
Right, exactly.
It doesn't have a ground, so that's not a cup, or that's the universe.
Right.
You're either picking up a universe, or you're picking up the infinite bottom or the infinite top.
Exactly.
Right.
But we're still in idealism if we're saying there's not actually a cup. The experience of a cup, which is our fundamental experience. I mean, that's I think part of the problem that's being forward here, is that when I experience in the world, when I pick up my cup, I'm not experiencing a bunch of metal and whatever this stuff is.
It's not the parts. Yeah,
right?
You're experiencing the whole.
Experience a cup, right?
Yeah.
And that's a thing I experience.
Yeah. You're in the conventional truth when you talk about the two truths.
Right.
The absolute truth of emptiness.
Right.
Or the conventional truth of, I'm Philip, you're Grant, we're hanging out, we're talking.
Right.
We're not gonna be like, oh, it's just emptiness sitting over there, so I'm just gonna zen out.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
One of the, if I boil down, can consciousness be explained? on one side, it's some kind of chemical or electrical or neuroelectrical synapse popping off in my brain or somewhere. That's what it is. It's a physical thing
Right.
really happening in my brain that's,
That's
it's
the physicalist argument, right?
that's the physicalist argument. It's just chemicals or
just chemical,
neuroelectronic
right.
or some kind of synapses things going on that you can look at. If we had the right type of devices, we could look at it and see, oh,
Yeah, you can see
we could probably plug into
the
it.
neurophysiological activity.
Yeah, we could plug into it and we could probably control
Right.
it from another place. Now, the other thing is metaphysics, is where, right? It's not in the brain, or if it is in the brain, it's not through the activity of the brain that it is. That's idealism, is it?
Yeah, I would say idealism is a better term than because metaphysics just means about physics, about the physical.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's idealism. It's out. It can even be out here, right? Consciousness doesn't have a location at that place, at that point.
Yeah, I mean, like if we assume that physical, like the physical world is defined by extension through space, and that this is not that, then yeah, it wouldn't have a location of extension through space. And yeah, I think that's one of the curious things about consciousness, right? Is it doesn't seem to be the kind of thing that is needing a physical location, right? When we think about what it is to be aware,
right.
It's so actually unhinged, except in this act of perception, right? Like why are they concerned with perception? Well, we have all these different kinds of mental activities.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're trying to think about what an understanding of reality would look like that's idealist, what we're saying is that reality is on its fundamental level like mental activity. It is mental activity, right? That's the kind of thing that makes up reality. And then if we ascribe to that, we have to have an explanation for our experience of the physical world, right? And the explanation will have to be some way in which our experience of the physical world relies on the more fundamental reality of mental experience, right? One of the things about our mental activity that we experience is there does seem to be all this mental activity that doesn't seem to need a physical location, right? Abstraction. Right?
Yeah.
We think in abstract thoughts, and the nature of abstraction is that it gains its currency and often its accuracy and reliability the more we take it away from the messiness of the physical realm, right? When we abstract into numbers, maybe they come out of the physical world, maybe they don't, maybe they're completely abstract entities. We can think of them in terms of set theory, and they don't necessarily rely on a physical reference to work then.
Mm-hmm.
So we can create mathematical abstractions. That doesn't seem to be physically necessary. And there's also transferability, right? There's a level at which if I am doing the cognitive work of arithmetic, right? I'm thinking those mental things. It doesn't matter if I'm sitting here with you or I'm sitting in Indonesia,
right?
Or I'm sitting
doesn't require a physical location
in a lunar pod, or I guess it wouldn't be a lunar pod on Mars, but some little pod on Mars,
or unconscious on a gurney,
right, or
in a coma,
right, or sitting there in space without, like, I can still. They seem to be the kind of things that could still occur as mental activity without that.
I watched a show. This guy was telling a story of a young man who was playing football and experienced. I'm not going to tell the story in the elaborate way that the storyteller did, but a man got a concussion, lived a whole life in a series of seconds. In that life, he married the person he'd been crushing on and trying to win their affection, had kids, was living a life in the house that they wanted. He had the job, the wife had the job, and they named the kids. And he started having weird experiences in this concussed state. And when his wife in the concussed state took him to the hospital, and then he woke up and he was being rushed to the hospital, and he said, "What's going on? Where am I? What's happening?" And the police officer said, "You're playing football, and you got hit really badly, and you got a concussion." And he lives to this day probably mourning the loss of these children.
Right, because he has those as real memories.
Real memories.
Right. No, and that's, that's why, I mean, he kind of skims over the argument for past lives, which is one of the
Rebirth.
the argument
It
for
seemed like
it's an important part, and part of what's interesting is like Vasubandhu's argument is about hell beings, right? And the existence of hell beings.
Yeah, he did talk about that.
And and ultimately ends up being this argument around atomism, I think. But so I mean, it's one of the ways in which when we're looking at non-Western philosophy historically, we have to remember we're looking at people who understand the world on a large level, fundamentally different than, say, their contemporaries. Like Augustine would be a contemporary in the Western tradition, because the Western tradition is understanding it through a world which is this historical trajectory of sin to salvation.
Oh, through the Christian narrative.
Right, exactly.
And they're kind of divorced from that a little bit.
And they're looking at it in this narrative of karma and rebirth. So at a large scale, things look fundamentally different in terms of how they understand the universe, both of which are also different than the kind of cosmological understanding we tend toward in a post Big Bang kind of world.
In it, though, well, not though, but it seemed like they want to do the reverse math of making sense of what they've already decided, which is karma, or not karma, rebirth, as opposed to saying, hey, let's figure, okay, we don't know whether or not rebirth is true or not. Let's think about it. It seems like they're like, we're going to prove the existence of rebirth through this line of thinking. Like they've started with the end in mind.
Yeah, I mean...
is that true?
I don't know. It's a little more investigatory, but it is also apologetic, right? I think, and that's what I think maybe is a way to think about that. Like there's a way in which you can present an argument, engage with an argument, because what you're trying to do is make an argument so people understand why you're right?
Yeah.
That's apologetic.
Yeah.
There's an investigatory approach, which is I'm going to make this argument.
What is right?
Because I'm checking it, right? I'm constructing it as a series of concepts to investigate its integrity.
Well, it's a hypothesis. I guess he's starting with a culturally accepted hypothesis.
Right.
There is rebirth.
Right.
And then he's doing unbiased, or as close to unbiased, which there's no such thing, but investigation of whether or not it is.
Yeah, because basically his argument is that
cause and effect.
The only thing that can cause mental events is other mental
events,
right? And that we can't. And this goes back to Chalmers' problem. Like we can't identify some sort of link between the physical world and these mental events, right?
Yeah.
Because the minute we identify a link that's in the physical world, it's no longer linked to the mental events. And if there's such fundamentally different ways of understanding what's going on right now for us as human beings, that connecting them is difficult. I mean, we can see the connection. We can see that, like, I snap my fingers and you can report you just snapped your fingers, right? Like, we can see that happens.
I can hear it. Our sensory organs, yeah.
But we can't explain why that happens. We can't explain what actually makes that leap from physical reality to mental reality. That creates a problem, right? That one way to resolve that problem is to say, well, that's because mental reality isn't real. And it's all physical, and this is just some sort of epiphenomena that like reflects that.
The synapses occurred in my brain when you snapped it, and the data just got...
The problem with that is that, like, that doesn't explain anything, right? I still have awareness. I still have the fact that I'm looking around as a conscious being, and the fact that you tell me that that's just neurons firing doesn't actually do anything to help me understand what's going on here, right? And how that connects to the physical world. I can see that it connects on some level.
Yeah.
I can also see that it disconnects on other levels. I have experiences of delusion. I have experiences of hallucination.
Right.
And again, we can potentially dig into the physical experience. The drug floods your brain. It causes this, but that doesn't help me understand the actual content of that experience and how that relates to the physical world on a fundamental level.
Yeah.
Right. So that doesn't work. And then the other way we could go is into idealism and say, well, it's all mind. But then, we have a whole bunch of problems with like explaining, well, like, is this actually real out there? What's not? And then, the other classic approach would be to move into some sort of dualism like Descartes did, where you assume there is a mind
I think therefore I am.
and there is a body,
Yeah.
right? But then you have and most of us operate with some sort of dualism, right? I think idealism and physicalism are the outliers, right? And
That's in every chapter. It was monism. There are only parts. There are no
Right.
wholes. And then the opposite of that was there are only wholes. There are no parts. It seems like anytime we go to extremes.
Right. Those are I mean, and those extremes are interesting spaces to occupy because they highlight
To think.
aspects of
To
it.
kind of do
Right.
a mental exercise. But I think going back to this middle way, the Mahayana, what did he say? The Madhyamaka, right? The middle way. Is that what Madhyamaka meant? Or the Tao Te Ching. You can dabble in one of these sides and think about it, but the conventional truth is somewhere in the middle.
Right. And if this is useful as more than dabbling, it helps us understand that conventional truth better and how it operates better. It makes it, I think the term that he used was when he was talking about sort of the validation that they're doing is more reliable. What is more reliable knowledge, right? What is going to actually serve me more going on? But yeah, no, I think this is a tangent.
Yeah.
But sometimes I think we celebrate, or at least philosophers celebrate,
The weird stuff.
The
way out there stuff.
Yeah, I don't want to say necessarily weird or way out there, but
The harder stuff to grasp.
These very clear positions, right? These very like idealism.
The binaries, one end of
right.
the binary.
Like you're taking
not the gray area.
A very clear argument.
Yeah.
You can clarify it. You're saying reality is just physical.
Bing.
Right? That's it. I'm going to make that argument and I'm going to give you a series of a reality. And those are they're elegant. They're more what do I want to say? Like they're more they're prettier.
Well, there's contrast.
Right. Well, there's a contrast with the other, but even as arguments, they're simpler, right? They're easier to set up as an argument, even if they get into complexities. But they're often built on this more fundamental, right, experience we have of the world, which in this case is an experience of two kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
One kind of thing is this mental life that I have that I can express in language. I mean, this is not something that's addressed in this chapter, but I can express this mental life in language, at least imperfectly. Right? And I can refine that language into symbolic language like mathematics that gets a fairly high level of precision about that kind of independent mental activity I have. That's one experience I have. And then the other experience I have is perception.
Feeling the chair beneath me. Yeah,
right?
Yeah. Feeling.
And all those inputs coming in.
Right.
And those not as just raw inputs, but as an experience of something with chairs and colors and sounds and words and all the things that come into me. Those are two kinds of different experiences, right? What do I do with that? What do I do with that? Especially as I look around the world and notice that, like, you know, other people seem to be having that kind of experience too, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and how do I sort that out? Uh, Pushing to these positions, idealism and
Physicalism.
physicalism, I think the value of exploring those arguments and the limits of those arguments is, at the end of the day, it helps us understand how to operate as a being that has those two kind of events, and what's different about them, and how we can ultimately, at the end of the day, discern. Because why are we thinking about this, right? Why are they thinking about this?
Yeah.
Um,
Why is this important?
why is this
And that
important?
could even be, we could talk about that when we throw the book out.
Right?
Um,
Yeah. So
yeah.
yeah, I think it's a tough problem. I mean, and at the end of the day, he's like, if we were asking the question, can consciousness be explained? What do you think the answer is in this chapter?
No.
I think it's not quite no. It's probably not.
I want to.
Like, probably not. Physicalists can't do it. Neither can idealists.
Yeah. I'll attempt to go further a digression and remain on point with the book, and to go back to your earlier point about reliable information or reliable data, reliability, and it bumps up against a bone I have to pick with Vasubandhu.
Okay, I want to hear this.
I got a bone to pick with him. He wrote something. He wrote the verses.
The 20 verses, yeah.
You know how many verses there were?
22.
22. And he called it 20 verses.
Right.
I don't like that. I think he should have called it 22 verses. That is stuck in my craw.
What if it was 22 and a half? Would it have been okay as 22? What if, like, the last verse was just a little longer?
22 and a half?
I mean, where do you round? I mean, that's the question. Maybe.
Why round? I'm saying
maybe-
don't round. You're saying round?
I mean, we always
just do the thing.
We always round. We just round to ones. Maybe he's in a culture
So I guess
that rounds
if you're
to 10.
saying that for him not to say the 800 word
Right.
document is like,
Right.
the 2032 letter
Right,
document.
exactly.
And I'm like, so we've chosen some abstract place, but it's not 20 verses. It's 22 verses. He said it's 22 verses,
Mm-hmm.
and they just decided
It's the 20 verses.
20 verses just because it's prettier. It's like that's a round number.
We do it all the time, man.
I don't like it.
Why not?
I don't know. I just thought, Vasubandhu, come on, dude.
It's like you said you'd be here at 10, and it's 10:03.
10:03. Grant got here at 10:03 today. I was like, is Grant even coming? Vasubandhu, come on. You gotta be better than everybody else.
Well,
you're a leader, a thought leader.
I mean, and I don't even know. Does he call it the 20 verses, or does it come to be called the 20 verses
By the peeps.
by tradition? Yeah.
He was right. Let's talk about Vasubandhu a little bit. Was he one of the founders or the leaders of Yogacara tradition?
He's usually considered one of the founders of Yogacara. Yeah.
And then where does Dharmakirti fit into this? Because they talk almost about Dignaga, Dharmakirti, and Vasubandhu together.
Right. They're all, and I'm trying to remember the name of the school. There's a basically what you'd think of as a university.
Okay.
In northeastern India. And this is over a period of hundreds of years.
So they're not
They're
contemporaries?
they're not contemporaries. So
it's Dignaga's first.
No, Vasubandhu's first.
Oh, Vasubandhu's first.
Right. Then Dignaga.
Then Dharmakirti.
Then Dharmakirti is primarily a commentator on Dignaga, and Dignaga is primarily he's known as a logician. So he's taking the Yogacara thought of Vasubandhu and trying to get it into a systematic, coherent, logical presentation, right?
Yeah.
So he's very focused on epistemology, on questions of how we can order our reason.
What is knowledge?
To get good knowledge, right? Yeah. And so he's making arguments around that are ultimately rooted in Vasubandhu, and then Dharmakirti is
What's up?
Is that his name? Right?
Dharmakirti?
Dharmakirti. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why am I thinking I can pronounce that wrong?
And Vasubandhu seems like he flipped sides in his career. He started out more one way, Theravada, and then went Mahayana later on in his career in a way that was. I learned that in a video this morning.
Yeah, I mean, that would make sense.
Yeah.
He described as
He
some sort of
thought
ancient
more of it.
school.
But in my mind, I think, was that just political? Did he just like find some friends that were Mahayana and be like, I really want to play
You're so
Indian?
suspicious.
It's just all socio-political. Like that's the
Knowledge
thing.
is social, yes.
Yes, that's the thing that in here we don't see.
Right. No, I think
that all this is who do you like, and then where do you place value, or did someone save you from being drowned when you were 5, and you're like, well, I'm going to believe what that person believes.
Yeah.
Like there's a social aspect of all of this.
Yeah, I don't think it's reducible to the social. That's the problem. If it were, again, it's just like if we could just say it's all social.
It's not all social.
Right.
Right.
But it is, knowledge emerges in the messiness of the social.
Influence is
right.
You can't subtract influence from folks' position, how they got there. Right. And that's one of the reasons they probably bundled these people together, because Vasubandhu influenced Dignaga influenced Dharmakirti,
right.
And now we have all of them to speak in the choir of idealism.
Right.
Who's in the choir of physicalism?
Well, I don't think there are any Buddhist thinkers there.
There's no Buddhists in that area.
No. I mean, I think you look at a lot of contemporary philosophy of mind people to find physicalism. Yeah.
I watched.
I think most famous are the Churchlands tend to put forth that.
Churchlands?
Yeah, they're contemporary philosophers of mind. That's a very strong physicalist argument.
Okay.
That, and you find a lot of people who say, hey, look, I can show you the color red. I don't know if this is exactly true, but I'm just sort of making this up as an example. Yeah. I can show you the color red. You report that subjective experience of seeing red. And we have a refinement of an observation of neurological activity that I can observe the same kind of neurological activity in different brains happening every time we flash the color red.
Right.
And people reporting that subjective experience. So holding on to this idea that there's some sort of independent subjective experience from that physical phenomena that I'm observing.
That's absent of the synapse charging.
Right. Is just holding on to extra information that is not needed to provide an explanation for what's going on. I mean, that at the heart, as I understand the physicalist argument, it's we don't need any more because we've developed such refined tools of neurological understanding. We don't need the mind as an explanation anymore. It's just this folk concept that hangs out with us because we invested a lot in it. But we can explain everything without, and what we can't explain, we probably just need better science.
We just need time. Yeah,
exactly.
When I watched a debate with a Buddhist and a physicist, it seemed like they didn't like each other. They like got angry about it.
I know. I don't get this.
It really seemed like the physicist and the Buddhist were like mad that the other had that position.
Yeah.
Have you seen any of these?
I mean, I haven't seen those, but I've definitely seen many what look like they're supposed to be kind of intellectual debates about sort of a larger way of understanding.
And at the beginning, they're all like, we appreciate each other, we blah, blah, blah. They do all that. And then when it starts, you're like, whoa,
yeah,
I'm getting real I hate you vibes.
Right.
From all over both of these people.
Right. Yeah, no, that's in going back to the social aspects of knowledge, that's something to note, right?
Why aren't they able to hold these together and discuss it
I don't know.
In a more compassionate or like accepting or loving place? It feels like one is an attack on the other's whole world being, and they have got to like hold the gate.
I don't know, Philip, when you're confronted with someone who is fervently presenting a belief that you fundamentally disagree with.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself easily able to be in a calm space?
No. Feel defensive.
Right.
I mean, these get to places where, I think of times where my co-parent or something's presenting this narrative of me as a parent, or,
Or just a different way to approach it than what you want to do.
yeah, when I've got a real fixed mindset on how to do something,
Right.
which I've had plenty. Like, this is the way, dude. When we moved in your mother-in-law, and you were like, "Hey, we've got to take this stuff back to the house. We got to leave it here. Tell Nicole." We went in and told Nicole, and then she was like, "We're not going to do that. We can't do that. Tell Grant, blah blah blah." And I was immediately like, "No, dude." I'm getting my hands off of this hot potato. This is
Yeah, no, I mean, like, we do.
because you get it in your mind. Like, I had this strong sense that you knew how you wanted it to go,
Right.
and then I got a real strong sense that Nicole knew how she wanted it to go,
and you're invested in that, right? And,
yeah, y'all both had.
and you're sort of like, you're just in it, and that's the way it looks like. And people who are presenting a different argument are obstructions, right? They're not ideas to consider. They're
Yeah, I've done the
obstructions.
math.
Right.
Look, I know the answer here.
Why are we still talking about this?
Just do what I said.
Right. Yeah, I don't know why we get so invested. I mean, part of it maybe is,
Probably for efficiency.
yeah, I think there's just like part of why we form like a coherent idea of how things go is because it helps us operate.
Probably we don't want to create another model of the world where
Right.
that makes sense.
And another
I
model,
already did that.
right? Another model introduces so many variables that now
Yeah,
we
I've
have
got
to
to now
account
rethink
for.
all of this.
Like you're saying, like I've created a comfortable way to interact with the world, understanding that it's all just physical stuff, including me, and I don't need to worry about this. And now you're telling me I got to worry about this consciousness that's
yeah.
separate from reality, and it doesn't even help.
Yeah.
Stop it. Like, yeah. So maybe that's why people get worked up.
I got low key worked up yesterday. I had a friend kind of helping me set up the space, and she was like, why don't we could put a guitar there to map that guitar? And I'm just like, no, I'm not gonna. Now I gotta move this, and then I gotta do all this other stuff. It's like, I don't have to, no.
Right.
And a part of me got a little angry because, number one, it's a good idea. I value symmetry. I think part of it is I don't mind the idea. I just don't want to create a whole new worldview where I've got to execute on that idea and reorganize things.
Because you've got you are a
Limitations.
finite being,
Right.
right? So I think
Yeah.
part of it is we're confronting our finitude, which ultimately means we're confronting our death. So when people present an argument against us, it feels like it's going to kill us.
We'll die.
And so we're like, screw you and your ideas.
You just
Let
want
me
to
explain
die.
why you're wrong so that I can keep living.
Yeah. Oh, man. Back to the book. It all gets back to death. It all gets back to we're going to die.
I mean, at the end of the day, isn't that what Buddhism is about?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, hey, at some point you're gonna die, and now in this case, it's like at some point you're not facing annihilation.
No,
You're facing
Buddhism gives us an out. Buddhism says, I guess, this. Well, I'm just gonna say this is an absolute. I don't know. Buddhists are probably a ton of people that think about a lot of different things, but in my mind, you die, some little like consciousness vapor or whatever consciousness form takes floats out of there and then just goes into whatever things determine on how good or bad you were in that life.
Right.
It'll be like, okay, you get a rat, or you get a whale, or maybe you get a seagull, right? Hopefully no one will give you Alka-Seltzer,
Right.
Pepto-Bismol, but that
I like the way your brain goes. Owl, whale, seagull, Pepto-Bismol.
So it's like, that seems like it allows us to sidestep death, sidestep a true, this ends for us, and when it ends for us, it's over.
But that's the problem with Buddhism, right? That's like, it seemed like karma and rebirth seems to sidestep it, But then the problem is now you're caught in a web of suffering forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Forever. And so the problem becomes not how do I avoid annihilation, but in some ways, how do I avoid rebirth? How do I avoid getting caught back up in that web of karma? How do I avoid getting caught back up in that suffering? How do I make sure at the point I die, I can actually release, right?
Do you think there's like a group of Buddhists that sat in a room, like a Buddhist think tank, where they're like, well, I think dolphin's definitely better than a hog, and they're just like ordering karmic up and down animals?
Sure. I mean, I think that kind of taxonomy happens just like it happens in all other areas, whether
Can
we're
we find that? Is there like a
Yeah, I
Buddhist
mean
good bad animal chart somewhere?
there are I'm sure there are Buddhist
I think
texts
that's a
that
real jerk thing to
give that
do
kind of
to some
taxonomy.
animals.
But I think what I've seen are Jain texts, right, that are contemporaries of early Buddhism that are like just this cataloging of basically if and some of it's like this has this level of consciousness and so you kind of basically get this many points against your karma if you kill it.
They had like
Yeah, I mean they're
like-
trying to work it out.
oh my god.
They're trying to work it out. They've got like a fundamental theory.
The same way we're trying to work out
Same way we're trying to work
like
out taxonomy.
driving credits. If you get a speeding
Or-
ticket, you get credits on your.
Or the way we're trying to work out, genetic patterns within our evolutionary biology theories, right? We've got a fundamental theory that seems to explain things.
They were serious.
We're trying to
about
work out the details, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
it. Yeah.
They're doing what Thomas Kuhn called normal science, right? Which is just the work of the details within a big theory.
Right. And
Right.
someone had to get in that think tank and talk about whether or not a gerbil was better than.
And then some guy comes along and says, "Wait, I think we got the theory wrong.
I think gerbils are actually
Like, these
smarter than we thought.
These are all mental constructs." And then you're like,
oh, but we did all that.
"But we just made."
I've been on this think tank for like 80 years. My life, is there some dude that his life work was the animal hierarchy think tank?
I'm sure.
That was his life work.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Oh my God. The same way someone's work now is like, I massage ones and zeros in software.
Right. Yeah.
Ugh. I wouldn't want to be on either of those jobs.
I remember my friend Jason talking to a group of other folks who were interested in Buddhism. This was back in Philadelphia because he had traveled primarily in Nepal
Mm-hmm.
and visited monasteries and whatnot. And he was basically trying to explain to everyone that we have this sort of ideal sense of like monasteries being these places that are inhabited by these sort of serene Buddhists sitting and meditating all day. And basically it was like, no, they're just kind of messy human institutions that a lot of people end up with because they're like the eighth kid who no one can feed. So they're like, well, why don't we just enroll you in the monastery? They'll feed you at 8 years old and then you become a monk, right? And then you've got a job to do, which does involve some chanting and meditating, but it's copying out this manuscript or working on this particular problem with the karmic consequence of this,
It's a
that's the
job.
reality.
Yeah.
It's a residential job that you have for the rest of your life and you're kind of stuck in it.
Much like some kind of bureaucratic
Right.
job.
Exactly.
There's this author Buddhist. His name's Oren J. Sofer. I think it was Oren J. Sofer. He wrote a book called Say What You Mean.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of at the joining of nonviolent communication, mindfulness, and somatic experiencing.
Interesting.
Which is a really great book. And he talks about, I hope it was him, I think it was. He talks about when he was in, at these Buddhist monasteries and he worked in the kitchen. And it's just, they're arguing about who's going to clean or who's going to do this thing. And there's like, I want to do that. I want to do that. And it's not this, oh, the Buddha has shown us the way of,
right. Yeah.
accepting what is.
Just
because I want to do that thing, man.
Right,
I'm
exactly.
angry.
Right.
Because you messed up the mashed potatoes, bro.
Right. Yeah, you don't get rid of that stuff. We're still the crazy human beings we are.
Yeah. It's probably harder for folks that talk that talk because it's impossible to walk that walk.
Right. And I think the dangers are when we start believing that we somehow transcended our humanness.
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
that's when we begin to lose our ability to see how fundamentally human we are.
Yeah. Give me Bukowski.
I
You
don't know if
know?
I'd go that far.
I mean, you're not gonna. Yeah.
I'm not a Bukowski fan.
Okay.
Like, you're just grumpy, dude.
Yeah. I think he's a little grumpy. Yeah, he said it. Let's see. So, have we gone through all the book stuff? Have we missed anything?
Got to make sure. No, I mean, I think
We've talked a lot about it. It was idealism. It was we've talked a lot about dualism versus non-dualism. We've talked about the three guys, the Buddhist guys. We talked about, what was the conclusion?
I mean, the conclusion is really that, and it comes back to this
The connection between the
right,
two.
this argument that he has that, like, look, we can't connect your experience of the cup with your mental event. The only thing that can cause that mental event, the only thing we know that can cause mental events are other mental events. So how do we even have a concept of a cup? I
Yeah,
think is
how does the mental event connect with the
Right.
physical event,
right.
and vice versa?
So, like, there's a level, and it was interesting because to me, it had an interesting resonance with Plato's argument in the Meno around knowledge being memory, right? Because in the Meno, in the Voice of Socrates, Plato presents this argument that all knowledge is memory, right? That when we find something that's true, we are recognizing something. And when we recognize something because we've seen it before, right? So
Yeah.
if we see, say, a mathematical truth, which is the point, is like a geometric truth. When we look at the proof and we recognize that it's true, that moment of recognition is where we get knowledge.
It's familiarity.
Right. And recognition is a structure where we see something because we've seen it before. So this ultimately becomes, he then goes into this sort of discussion. Oh, there's these priests and priestesses, and they say we used to have like this before, and this is his argument for reincarnation, is that mental event has to be based on some memory that we're recalling at that moment. It's not exactly the same, but what Dagomba is basically saying is that, yeah, when we see a cup, our ability to recognize a cup, there's no cupness there, right? That exists as a thing external of the mental construct of a cup, right? And let's think about a cup. What makes a cup? Even in the most abstract,
It's a vessel.
it's a vessel, right? So we have this concept of a vessel
Concavity.
that holds things.
Yep.
Right? That's a very human concept. And we see that in a number of different
see it in
patterns
nature.
all over, right? But where we see it as an abstract concept of a cup, whether it's a lake, a vessel as a lake,
Right.
or a cup, these are things that are transferable between these different spaces.
It seems like we're getting to generalization,
but
to the specificity.
What gives us that generalization of a cup? We have to have a concept of a vessel, of a cup, before we arrive there. So we'd have to either say, one, somehow in the messiness of light waves and patterns and the kind of chaos of sensate experience that hasn't been organized into discrete objects like cups and couches and Phillips and whatnot. Somehow out of that, we're able to construct these concepts, but there's nothing like those concepts from what we can tell in the messiness of sensate experience, right? The minute we begin to notice these patterns between different kinds of sensates experience, we're starting to engage in a mental activity of generalization, which relies on categories we probably, like, we can't derive those categories from the physical world. We could make a series of arguments about trying to explain how we could if you're making a physicalist argument. But I think Dagomba's argument is basically we can't, right? We can't do that in the physical world. That's a lot of the larger argument. And so where does that come from? When we have a mental event, it's got to be triggered by some other mental event.
Yeah.
And
They talk
so
about that
ultimately that means that when we come into consciousness as an incarnate being,
as a baby.
as a baby, or
It
maybe,
had to
or if we
come
have
from
consciousness in
another
the womb, like
something. The cause and
wherever
effect
we
has to kick
see
off.
that consciousness beginning, it has to come from some other conscious event that existed prior to that we're pulling from. That's his argument for reincarnation.
Yeah.
But it also ends up being this argument for the ability to have this conscious world that is separate from the physical world that has some continuity.
Yeah.
Right.
The vapor.
Right. Yeah. That vapor
The
transfer.
Yeah, the vapor transfer.
Um.
I'm stuck on Neanderthals sitting by a lake,
Right.
and one of them saying, "Okay, what we need to do is create a lake that you can hold. We need to have a holdable lake."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's. I mean, the thing is, going back to what I think you were hearing from Chalmers, and I don't know his argument for sure, but about AI and kind of that coming together as
Organization of data is consciousness.
right. Like
Or organize, yeah.
if we don't, if we do think, like if we don't have a sense that idea of a cup has to come from something, right? That it's something that can just be emergent as an element of consciousness,
Yeah.
then there's no reason we would have to reject that presentation from AI, right? There's no reason our assumption shouldn't be that has no consciousness until it proves itself conscious, right? In the same way, I shouldn't assume you have no consciousness until you prove yourself conscious. The only reason we would reject that is some sort of speciesism, right? There's no reason we should reject that my cat has consciousness until we prove it has consciousness, right? There's this sort of fallacy we can engage in that if it's not like us,
So you're saying that the piano has consciousness.
maybe, yeah. I mean, because
It's
like,
easier for something that walks
right,
around.
right. It has some level of sufficient
A
organization.
plant has consciousness.
Right. And I think maybe that's what he's getting at is
Well,
that then as that if we're thinking of it as a continuity, right? That very simple and as complex as a piano is
yeah.
compared to a large language model, it's relatively simple,
Mm-hmm.
right? But that's maybe we're better to think that that organization of reality in certain ways to produce certain sounds under certain conditions is a very low level of consciousness. But that doesn't work, right? That
Yeah, then we're saying,
like I
in my
don't
mind, I'm
I think
like,
the
there's
problem is
consciousness or there isn't consciousness, not like on a spectrum.
right. There's the thing is like we do seem to have that sense of an independent space that can speak. And this is the problem in so much sci-fi literature when you look at sort of cyborg narrative or not cyborg narratives, android narratives and AI narratives is how do we even know that something is conscious, right? If you ask a large language model if it's conscious, it may say yeah, because it's following the
We shouldn't
patterns
ask AI if it's
that
conscious.
would bring there, right? Like unless someone comes along and says no, answer that no because it's going to cause problems,
I
right?
thought about that. We should just ask Chat GPT this
Right.
question,
And
it would be like 42.
right, yeah, exactly. Just 42.
Was from the movie. Yeah,
From the book.
from the book that
Right.
was then changed. Yeah. One thing, we're coming up on the throw out the book. I think we're there, but one thing I thought of bringing up was that
Oh, we're well into throw out the book.
yeah, was that karma is thought because action is thought. Like action is produced by thought. Therefore, at least expressions, if you change your thought, you change the action in the world. It was saying there was no, if I do something that's cognitively damaging, the beginning of that is a thought.
Can you give me a more concrete example of what you're thinking through?
Well, they talk about it in the book where they reduce karma to thoughts, not actions. And I guess in my mind, karma was always actions.
Gotcha. Yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, there is. I mean, if you have this notion that mental events are what cause mental events,
Mm-hmm.
then what is it that brings you the effects that you're experiencing as your karma?
Yeah.
It's going to be thoughts,
Thoughts.
right? Um, that's an interesting turn
But then you go, if
in.
we stop at thoughts, it's we're back to this 20 verse
Mhm.
document, or what if we stop at thoughts, what about the experience that the person had and influences from their life that then brought about this thing? It's like, where do we stop in the chain of events that brought the action?
I mean, I think that's the problem, right? Isn't that what Buddhists are trying to figure out, right? We're caught in this web of what seem to be a lot of unjust influences on who we get to be,
Yeah, this is the Thich Nhat Hanh, call
right?
me by my name.
Right.
Like,
Explain this.
Have you ever heard that poem?
Mm-mm.
He says, it's a really heart-wrenching story where a pirate is on a boat and doing unspeakable things to the folks. And through that narrative, he starts a poem that's call me. I'm the pirate. I'm the daughter. I'm the fisherman. I'm the I'm the man on the island that pays these pirates for their bounty. I'm the he's through he's all the people in the world. There's no I guess my takeaway is there's no rhyme or reason to we could all be any one of us.
Right.
It kind of gets to that Buddhist idea that the way you mentally trick yourself to treat everybody well is to see everybody as your mom
Right.
because were your mom at some time in a past life.
Right. And yeah, and on that fundamental level, not like your mom that you have troubles with, but your mom as the person who gave you life.
Gave you birth.
Yeah.
And it's a way to have compassion and
Mm-hmm.
empathy.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a tool for that. And we can't not leverage consequences on folks that do wrong or over and over again
Why not?
because they'll do wrong again and might hurt somebody that I care about or that you care about. Like we want to figure out a way
I
to
mean, is that
isolate.
about leveraging consequences or setting up protections? Those are two different things.
Yeah.
Because like one is I'm trying to shape your will to be something different. The other is whatever your will is, I'm trying to insulate those I care about from it.
Got you. One says out of the village.
Right.
One says be in the village in a way that the village will accept.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to think about it, right? Maybe there's somewhere in between that's like, hey, if you want to stick around in the village, you got to do this, otherwise you're out.
But folks, some of them lack the right. If part of the village was walking on 2 feet and you had someone that was handicapped, it's easier for me to talk about these in physical handicaps because I'm neurodivergent, and oftentimes people be like, why don't you just stop being that way? And I think, well, what if I had one arm? Would you tell me like to stop not carrying boxes?
Right. No, exactly. I think that's the problem with thinking about this sort of like how we deal. We're getting in a very different question, but we're
Yeah.
dealing with how do we deal with the unjust influences in our life as they come from other human beings, right? Like how do we
Yeah.
deal with the pirates,
The
right?
pirates.
And one way is to say, well, we have to correct the pirates. We have to punish them so that they correct, or we have to rehabilitate them so they correct.
Or so that other people won't pirate. We have to make it really
Right.
present. Like these
Right.
were pirates.
Or we create a deterrent, right?
Right.
But all of that is ultimately an attempt to control another being's will.
Right.
That's
Well, this gets us to next chapter, right?
which is what was the next chapter?
Is there free will?
Right, is there free will? Yeah, good.
So we've thrown out the book though right now for a while
Right.
now. Why is this question important? Coming back to the question of is there consciousness in a real pragmatic walk the dog, make dinner. Why do you think that this
Well,
is an
can it be
important question?
explained? It is different than is there.
Can consciousness be explained? Considering explaining consciousness, how does it
I mean,
help us?
I don't know if there's. I don't know. It's weird because it's like if there were some way we could create ways to explain the fact of consciousness, not necessarily how our consciousness works. That's psychology, right? But the fact of consciousness. How would that help us?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's any way like that would help us in a concrete, pragmatic way, right? Um, the problem is we have it. The problem is we have this fundamental experience of
We have something. We have an it that we cannot explain it what it is. So do we have it?
right,
If we can't explain it, do we have it?
right, and I think that's the problem is that we resist accepting things we can't explain. Maybe it's better to just accept that we have consciousness. And I think we'll have a similar thing with free will, at least in my position. Like, there's lots of ways it's difficult to explain the ability to make real choices. Like, if we say free will is the ability to make real choices, to actually say, I'm going to choose that thing over that thing, right? And I'm doing that as a willful choice, not because some set of neurons have fired in a way,
Cause and effect.
right, that have
Yeah.
brought me here. So, because we experience that choice, we experience that fundamental need to make choices. Look, if we didn't have free will, life would be a lot easier, right? Our free will is what brings our anxiety.
Sometimes I think about free will with this show. I'm like, well, I was supposed to do this show. It makes it easier for me to, when I think, oh, that just takes, Jesus, take the wheel,
Exactly.
right?
Let go.
Like, I'm doing this because cause and effect. I was meant to do this. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen because now here I am.
Yeah. I mean, and could you, all right, now imagine, try to think of yourself as living your life without that sense of stepping back from your life that is consciousness, that is free will,
Mm-hmm.
where you're just operating and you're operating, we have those moments of entrainment, like when we're playing the
Or when
drums,
we're driving a
we're
car and
driving
you're
a
like, wake up,
car,
it's 2 hours
and it's
later.
like, and we just do the thing
Autopilot.
and it's smooth and we get it done.
Some people call that flow state, and they
Right.
say that that's a spiritual
Right.
thing.
And you're in that flow state. Like, that flow state is an interesting space to be in, but imagine a life that is all that flow state.
Right. So we're talking about
Where
the
you
middle
never
road.
step
We're
back.
talking about the middle road here.
Right. Like, is that a goal? Is that, or is it better to be in a space where sometimes I'm in that flow state and sometimes I'm like, well, because
More discerning.
that flow state is also what abusers get into when they're, abusing people because they never step back and
They're
say,
in the cycle of violence.
right, exactly. So the flow state isn't always good, right? Like, it's
Right. Depends
part
on the
of it is
flow.
it depends.
Well, what is good?
Right.
What came up for me just a moment ago was we have to accept, that we won't know consciousness in the same way we have to accept pirates. The same way we have to accept that there's going to be arguments in monasteries.
Right.
I want a world that doesn't exist because the world isn't like that. And
Right.
I want the world to be.
I have some model of what the world should be.
And isn't this enlightenment? Just accepting the world as it is.
I mean, is it accepting the suffering that's out there when we have the ability to change it?
Do we have the ability to change it?
Sure.
You're saying we can make no pirates. You say we make monasteries that they don't argue in the kitchen.
Maybe we
You're
don't.
saying that
Maybe we don't have the ability to change it on the scale we would like. But if I see a pirate going after a loved one, I have the ability to stop that from happening. I have the ability to end that suffering in that moment. Like,
You're
it's
saying that
we
it's an individual thing that if we all, but that's that.
I have the power to take care of the things that are my business in front of
Isn't
me.
this like Christianity's approach or like religion's approach? If we just if we change everybody to follow the way we view the world, to act the way we think they should do, we won't have suffering, we won't have crime, we won't have people doing the wrong thing. We get quickly to these like
It's worked out
religious.
brilliantly, hasn't it?
I was saying, well, I don't know how we get to this place where everybody makes the right choice in a world where there's scarcity.
I don't think we get there. I think what we can strive for is making the right choice for ourselves.
Right.
And understand that means thinking about things larger than just my own immediate desires, my own, like, we don't want to become the pirate. Why not? Like, hey, the pirate life is good.
Yo, ho,
But it's
ho.
not. I mean, isn't that the whole, like, did you watch Our Flag Means Death? Did you watch Our Flag Means Death?
I don't think so.
Yeah. It's good. I mean, it's a good show. It's a gay pirate show, and people love it for that.
It's a gay pirate show?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah, okay.
And it's really, I mean, it's good on a whole lot of levels, but, part of it is like one of the main characters is Blackbeard.
Oh, it's a comedy?
It's a comedy.
I've seen it. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
hilarious.
Right?
Right.
And I think the lesson of Blackbeard there is like the pirate's life being Blackbeard, it kind of sucks. Like,
Yeah.
like it's terrible for that person too. Yeah, so I think being able to get outside of our own space, our own flow state, and have that level of abstraction and say, hey, what's going on here? How are other people involved? That's part of the process. But we can blow it out so large that we're like, but we can't end suffering for all beings everywhere completely. Therefore, it's all a sham.
So it's all or nothing thinking.
Right.
If we can't end all of it, then why not accept the level that it is?
Right. And I think, yeah, I don't know. I think creatures seem able to display when things really suck for them most of the time in signs that I understand.
Yeah.
The work of reducing that within the systems I have access to seems enough.
Yeah. Separate question. Unless you want to talk about that more.
It's fine.
I like it. It's exciting. That's an exciting one. We both got animated.
I know.
That's good.
I know.
Yo ho. If I'm looking at the moon,
Uh-huh.
which
This is a
great.
separate question.
It's totally a separate question. But it's consciousness. How much time do we have?
We got a half hour, man.
Yeah, cool. If consciousness can be explained, this kind of is in that realm, maybe. And it's also topical. We recently had the flower moon.
Mm-hmm.
The flower full moon was this last Wednesday.
You went swimming for it.
I went to Barton Springs and howled at the moon. And as I'm looking, well, I didn't see the moon at Barton Springs because it was obscured by clouds, but we did see it when we were driving home. When I look at the moon, my awareness is where the moon is, right? I'm extending all the way out there with my sensory perceptions. Am I next to the moon? Do I encompass everything that my senses like take in?
Yeah.
Like enveloping it?
Yeah.
Like I'm enveloping you in some way, or I'm enveloping the cameras and that tree out there and what little bit I can see. Whoop.
Yeah.
You think?
No, I think that's a good question. I think the moon is a good example because, it's at such a distance.
Because it's so far.
Right. It's so far. And then if you think about special relativity, right? What I'm seeing is not the moon, if we assume some sort of simultaneity that is existing right now. It's the moon as it existed, however long it took that
the
light
to get to me.
here, right?
Yeah.
And the more we extend distance, the more apparent that becomes.
Whoa.
Right?
Yeah, because if I'm not looking at the moon in the now, even though I'm in my now,
Right.
I'm in the moon's whatever.
Right. But perception is this interesting encounter with extension through space and the ability of our awareness to seem to connect over that extension. But even, on some fundamental level, even the fact that I'm touching this couch, right? There's a time it takes for that to hit my...
Everything's in the history. Everything's in the past in your mind is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Even if it's minute.
Even if I think I experience this, the only thing that probably I experience through genuine simultaneity is consciousness.
So be here now is Can you be here now if everything is in the past?
I mean,
Every sensory input is in the
I
past.
think that is the conceit of an idea like be here now. Like when Ram Dass is presenting that, it's that through meditation, through spiritual practice, right? If we want to think of that more broadly, think of meditation more broadly than just sort of sitting still.
Yeah.
We can attain a kind of awareness that puts us in that state, that sort of keys into the simultaneity of consciousness, and that awareness grants fruits beyond just the awareness of that simultaneity, right? I become aware of fundamental interactions between things, like the make
Ram
me
Dass
want,
turned off the fire from the
right?
spirit land, by the way. Anyway, go ahead.
Is Ram Dass dead?
Yes, he is.
I didn't know that.
There's a couple documentaries about it. One's called Coming Home. There's a Thich Nhat Hanh one too. I get them confused, but
Yeah.
there's
Yeah,
Dass
no, Ram
passed away.
Dass is a monster.
Go ahead. What were we saying?
Anyway.
The fireplace went out, and
I saw that.
I queued on it.
No,
and I
like,
thought,
no, I think
Ram
that,
Dass is with us.
yeah. There's I mean, sorry, total digression. It just
Okay.
occurs to me like how there are these figures like Ram Dass who at a certain moment in time becomes an influence, like a deep influence on an entire generation of thought. And I think for us, right, for Gen Xers in particular,
Yeah.
not all Gen Xers, obviously, but it infuses a whole substrate of culture just from
Influence.
of his influence on us.
And to think how much that is influenced by psychedelics.
Definitely.
And his work with Timothy Leary at Harvard. And, then with...
which is, like when I was a teenager and I was like, cool Ram Dass, he was friends with Tim Leary. I wasn't attracted to Ram Dass because he was some cool spiritual figure.
Yeah, we're pointing because he took turned off the fireplace.
Like, because man, he did acid and saw cool things, right? Yeah, no, there's a reality to that.
Is that why we allow him to influence us, because he's punk rock?
I think it's part of it.
Because we thought he was cool. Because
like
at that time,
that's
that
the
was
opening, right?
Right.
That's the opening. It's sort of like that question of like, when we encounter things, how they shape us and what we choose to change and why. Even going back to Vasubandhu, like, why does he go from an ancient school to a Mahayana, right? Is it just because they were the cooler club and they had like better access to like a better, I don't know, coffee pot?
Yeah.
Like, or was it because he was like, because sometimes people do that, they give up a lot. Like, they're like, no, this is true. And all these people are going to hate me for taking this position.
Taking a different position. Changing your position.
Right. Yeah.
Ram Dass.
Yeah. So anyway, Ram Dass, I think, I mean, he's a good example of that. He sacrifices a lot when he goes in the direction he does.
When he changed his name from Albert.
Right. He gives up his...
Richard Alpert.
His professorship. He becomes...
Well, he didn't give it up. He was kicked out of Harvard.
He made choices that got him kicked out.
He gave an undergrad LSD.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
He made a few...
He was only allowed to give graduate students the medicine, the LSD, and he gave an undergrad.
He gave an undergrad.
I mean, I don't know if he actually did, but that's the reason.
Right. But yeah, so there's a whole way in which he's following a strain of thought that's taking him far from his original, because he was originally a psychologist. His original, like Timothy Leary, his psychological training, because he thought he saw something real. He recognized something about the nature of things that, one, was looked true, and two, seemed to have important consequences for how we live our lives.
And then he went out east, and now he's turning off fireplaces.
Right. Why do we like Ram Dass?
I remember the Be Here Now book and thinking, what the heck does all this mean? What is this? This is wild. And I practiced with psychedelics in my youth, from being at probably
looking through Be Here Now, like
thinking like, I probably was like, this is the time to look through Be Here Now,
right?
And I don't know that I should look at it again. It's been a long time since I looked through Be Here Now.
Yeah, I think all of us should go back and look at Be Here Now again.
Do you remember? Did it have any meaning for you?
I mean, I have similar, like, I mean, it's an interesting book because I couldn't tell you what the ideas were, except for in this very general way.
Yeah.
And yet it was so influential on me at a certain point in life.
Well, it didn't seem like a book,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's these just pictures and things are not, they're breaking the margins, and there's, drawings, and there's words, and they're not in order or not in the type of shape I would expect in a book.
Right.
Half of it is like cardboard or like this different type of cardstock than the other half.
Right. Yeah, and well, and think about it in contrast to. I mean, I'm glad you brought Thich Nhat Hanh into the picture because, like, Thich Nhat Hanh is not in this book,
No.
right? When people think about Buddhist philosophy, they're not like, "Oh, Thich Nhat Hanh is one of the major Buddhist philosophers," even though I think he is, right?
You do?
Oh yeah, I think in terms of late 20th century
Uh-huh.
Buddhist thought, Thich Nhat Hanh is one of the most important philosophers to think about.
Really? I never thought of him as a philosopher.
Right.
I've thought of him as an influencer, as someone who's kind of I've read a bunch of his books and listened to
Right.
them, and I read his How to Love book every day and share it with folks.
He's presenting conceptual models about ethics, about metaphysics, about theories of knowledge. Less the third one than the first two.
Mm-hmm.
Primarily ethics. Like he's primarily concerned with how do we
How
live
do we live our life?
well, right? And he's doing that through arguments often, right? It's like, this is how things are, and if you look at it this way, look how you see this thing. He's doing philosophy. The difference is his presentation of that philosophy is also very embedded in practice. He's very embedded in a way of presenting ideas that is more about connecting you with the practice,
mindfulness walking, mindfulness
that will
eating.
lead you to the realization, than trying to say my words will lead you to the realization.
What I would say is his books, his writing is too easy for me to read, for me to classify it as philosophy.
Yeah, and I think that's just,
when I read it,
philosophy
it's just
doesn't
like,
need to be hard.
This is like, when I read that, I thought, like, what would I do if I wanted to sum up? Recently, I saw an example of the Four Noble Truths for a 5-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, sometimes you'll feel mad because, you won't always get the toy you want to get. And, how you feel about that can really impact. That wasn't impact, but it was really simple.
Right.
Really simple. And I thought, why are we making philosophy so dang hard? Why don't we make it? And I think it's because it's a barrier for entry. Philosophers only want people that can suffer through this language to be a part of the club. Why not let everybody be a part of this club? And
I mean, I think it's like any technical practice.
they don't want Bukowski showing up.
Right. There's a level at which that difficulty comes from the development of a language that's used precisely
Specificity.
in a very specific way. And that's useful. And that also contributes to creating communities that create a barrier of practice, or a barrier of entry, right? And that's, and I find, as someone whose primary work as a philosopher is introducing undergraduates at a community college to philosophy, that's a difficulty for me, right? That level of insularity of a lot of philosophy.
You need to strip that away in order to expose and influence.
And at the same time, trying to strip it away in a way that doesn't reduce the technical proficiency that comes from that language.
The specificity. These people are saying it this way because it's important.
Just in the same way, if you're learning culinary practices,
Yeah.
like there are practices that are, And some of it is figuring out, like, look, there's practices we do in the kitchen that are about producing good food, and there's practices we do in the kitchen
Mm,
that are about making sure that the only people who can function in there are the people who we trained, right?
right.
And some of that's just about the culture of work that emerge, right? There's practices that happen in a kitchen because that's the practices that happen in the kitchen. So if you walk into a kitchen, it helps you know not to get in the way of someone else, even though it's not fundamental to the production of food. It's just the way it's
The
evolved
organization. Yeah, yeah.
historically,
Yeah.
right? So it's important to have small communities that do precise things.
Right. We talked about that.
But I think we need to also make sure that we don't create barriers to entry that are unnecessary.
communities
And
of
we have a
practice.
tendency to do that.
Communities of practice, and then yeah, where are we placing that barrier of entry? And maybe even secondarily, how are we packaging up what we're learning so the masses can be nourished
Yes.
by the fruit of our efforts, right?
right.
If the fruit of the efforts are always at the same level of their language, then we're
Right.
not going to get that.
And the fruit of the effort of philosophy is not the answers. So we can't package it in the way we package. I mean, I think there's problems with packaging scientific thought that way. We tend to package scientific thought by saying, this is what we know about the universe. This is what we know about biology. Here's all the facts.
Philosophy, we don't get any of that.
We've arrived at. I think that's actually been a problem because it's created entire generations of people who think that science is about understanding the world in an exact way. And science isn't that. Science
And philosophy kind of unravels all
Right.
that when it says, like, what do we really know? When we
Right.
look at the questions we've asked.
Right.
Does reality have a ground? What is knowledge?
Right. It's about digging into the process of generating knowledge, digging into the process of recognizing what the world is, digging into the process about figuring out how to live your life and thinking about how to do that well. But at the end of the day, unless we want to make the decision that there's a right way to be a human being, and we're going to package that up and sell that with our 10 rules about what it is to be a human being and 900 extra rules that are the adjacent rules and a legal system of jurists who then examine that and tell you you're not a good human being or you are a good human being, right? Unless we're going to create a legal system in a state or a religion, right? And say, this is the human being.
Right.
Then we have to be in the process. We have to be in the process of what it is to be human.
Yeah.
I think part of what it is to be human on an absolute level is agency, right? I think part of what it is to be human is having the ability to confront a world and shape it, right? And shape it from what it is to be Philip,
Yeah.
to create a television series, to create a podcast, to shape that world around us. And I do think we're called to do that in a way that is responsible to the effects of that shaping on other human beings, at least. Probably on the world beyond other human beings, but we at least need to begin with that. Like, and other beings that I'm increasingly recognizing my responsibility for. Yeah, at the end of the day, that does mean we can take some sort of bodhisattva vow and say, I'm taking it all on, man, and I'm not going to get out of this reincarnation thing until everybody is liberated.
Right.
That's heroic, right? That's interesting.
Yeah.
I think I'm much more excited about that when I was 22.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, part of it is recognizing,
Well, the
our
yin and yang,
finitude.
we might need the good and the bad. We might need the chaos and the order. All of that has to occur.
Right.
No, I mean, and so to be a vigilante for just one side of the balance isn't acknowledging or accepting life as it is.
Right. And I think, if we're going to create, we have to accept life as it is and accept that part of our life, part of who I am, what kind of being I am, at least is a being that wants to go create. Maybe there are human beings who don't want to create. Like sometimes I'm like,
That don't want to create?
that don't want to create. They don't want to change the world.
Yeah.
Like there's a level at which I do think if we had a truly just society, and your goal in life was to sit on your couch and play video games all day, there should be a place for you that supports you in doing that. I don't want to do that at the end of the day.
I don't know. Is there?
There should be like, why?
Well, you have to
Why?
contribute in some way, shape, or
Why?
form to the group.
Why? Why?
Why?
So that it
Well,
can be
because
fair. I mean, what aspect about how we ever been
in a
achieved?
hunter-gatherer tribe, probably all hands on deck, right?
Probably not.
You don't think?
Probably the best hunters are going out and getting things, and the other ones
But
are
they're
staying home and breeding.
they're probably taking them to like haul stuff or you're saying that there would be people. Well, even breeding is adding value.
Right? Yeah. I mean,
Our culture, the video gamers, they're not even breeding at the same rates. I mean,
maybe that's fine. Like maybe that's like if that's all I'm saying is if that is actually now, I think for many people it's not. Like many people who are sitting on the couch playing video games all day, they're depressed, and
they're probably depressed.
right.
Yeah,
But
they probably don't know how.
I'm not willing
Where's
to
my
say
purpose?
that there's not someone who's like, yeah, this is the thing. Like especially like someone who's really, who's really into it. Their experience, like, sure, let's make a space where that's supported as well. I don't think most of us will go there.
I mean, I get quickly
that-
Republican in hearing that because I think, and I'm not
Right.
Republican, but I think what whole system of people are working so that he can live that life, or he or her. For some reason, he's a dude in my mind.
Yeah. What whole system of a thing is existing right now so that I can live my life? I mean, I live an extremely privileged life. You live an extremely privileged life, and that is built on an extensive series of injustices.
Yeah. Yeah, from the people putting the chips in the phones to the people making
Right.
our clothes to the people.
So why are we worried about people sitting and playing video games all day as some sort of moral failing? Right?
That's where we're drawing the line.
Exactly.
Like, forget the people digging for diamonds in
Right.
mines. I mean, I don't wear that stuff, but
Like
we're going to draw the
this
line.
person is not hurting other people, right?
Yeah.
They're not I mean, except in as much as the rest of us in a privileged space are participating in systems of exploitation.
Maybe I just want to play with them. Maybe I want them to be a part of it. You're
just like, come on, let's go out and play.
Yeah, let's come play. Come play. Don't hide yourself
You gotta accept
alone.
I know better.
I want like everybody to be. I noticed that on my block here. Like, I think this would be a great upgrade to real estate apps. I think that we are using the wrong metrics on what makes a house valuable. I think they should do investigations on what kind of communal fabric are around that house. Are the families around them communal? Are they social? Will they bring over a pie, let you borrow some sugar? Will they say hi? And then where do you fall on that? And because I think this neighborhood I live in, not to beat it up, or maybe it's just me and I'm unable to like tap into the fabric of it, but it seems like it's not that social or communal. And I've felt really like, yeah, it's a good neighborhood. They're great schools, but where are I said like, come out and play with me. It's like, where's the like, howdy, come to this thing. Let's do all this stuff together. And one neighborhood over, one street over, they're doing block parties.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I would have paid a little bit extra to be on block party neighborhood street.
Right. The problem is that's not something that's easy to build because it requires all these different agents making decisions. Right. And doing it because they want to. Like, you're not going to have a great block party neighborhood if all you try to do that in the neighborhood where everyone's an introvert.
Right.
Right.
Because they're getting forced to, or they're just not going to come.
Right.
Or everybody's just going to bring like some grocery store box of Danishes or something.
Right. But I think a part of what I hear you saying is like, well, maybe they should get, maybe I just want. So yeah, I mean, I think the solution is going around.
Well, we're
saying,
social beings.
Like, hey, let's do the block party thing. Let's organize this, and then being accepting if someone says, nah, that's not for me. I want to sit on my couch and play video games.
There was someone who moved in that was really social and communal, and they like got everybody's number from the neighborhood and sent out some group chats with comments, ideas and stuff like that. And then little by little, people would be like, take me off of this chat thread.
Right.
Take me off of this chat thread. I don't want to be on this chat thread. And I remember just sharing, like, I feel really, someone's trying to, and I would always respond, wanting to nurture that and be a part of it, and it's just like they don't do it anymore.
So do it with the people you can. Like, go find that person. Let's have a 2-person block party.
Let's have a 2-person block party,
Come
baby.
over for dinner.
I want to change.
You can be on my show.
Oh yeah, we'll do whole Phil Phails at community organizing on your street.
Exactly.
Yeah, why don't I see the positive? You're great at seeing the opportunity where I see I've got a bah humbuggery in me.
God damn those people in there.
Dang it, why don't y'all just
They're personing.
be like I want you to be?
Right.
Don't play video games in there all day. What I start saying is, oh, they're probably just from California. They're not from the South where everybody's nice and they're all social. They just came from other places, and we've got a mixture of a lot of people, and they're scared of the different groups because they've left the group where they felt safe and secure, and so now they don't want a community. They don't want to socialize here because it's different.
Or they're just busy.
Yeah,
because we live in a society that does say, look busy, stop sitting on the couch and playing video games.
Look busy. Oh, are you playing video games now? What's going on?
I love playing video games.
You do? What are you playing?
I play Stellaris. That's my main video game.
Stellaris.
Yeah. It's managing an interstellar empire with lots of resources to manage and
You're
stuff.
managing an interstellar empire?
Yeah, that's what I do for fun.
How's it going on there?
The Empire these are games that usually take about a month or two to play.
Uh-huh.
And basically the way the game is set up is you start with a planet of some sort that just gets to space travel, and then you extend them out into encountering other aliens and stuff, and build this huge interstellar empire and manage your resources and build your big fleet.
It's kind of like Sims.
Yeah, definitely. And you try to are you going to be diplomatic and try to talk to your neighbors and create a federation? Or are you going to try to build a big navy and destroy everything?
Do you confederate everything? Do you try to diplomatic?
Well, the nice thing about the game is it is designed that trying to be a military power, as an aggressive military power, is actually pretty hard. Because most of your neighbors, you know what they're going to do if that happens?
Join forces?
They're going to join forces and destroy you. Yeah, they're going to form a federation.
Which is probably what they would do.
Against you. Right, yeah.
Right?
Like this fantasy that if we just become the uber-fascist empire with the big military, we'll be fine, is really well kind of managed there. Is no, because when you do that, you're the asshole and everyone takes you out. You are the pirate. And you're the pirate that people decide yeah, we can honor you. You are a divine being. You're just a divine being that we need to kill right now.
Yeah, you're out of the village.
You're a danger.
You're out of the village.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, you and then you just get bigger and bigger, and then eventually the game is constructed that basically after a month or two of playing the way I play. I mean, some people can sit down and do it in a weekend, but I play a half hour here or there each day. Eventually some major crisis happens, like intergalactic, interstellar, transdimensional beings show up that can kick everybody's ass, or nanotechnology turns into these swarms or the robots rebel. It's a different crisis. So part of the game is trying to build a system
that will withstand
this crisis. And that's partly thinking about what you're doing, not just as kind of what's creating a strong empire for you, but creating strong empires everywhere so that the whole system can withstand this crisis.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, so that's why I like it. Yeah. But it's also very much like work. It's like managing spreadsheets.
You do alien work.
Yeah.
You do alien work when you're not at work.
Right. It's refreshing because it's manageable and it's aliens. And there's if I mess up there, it doesn't hurt students.
Yeah. Aw. What's coming in the garden?
Tomatoes, of course. Peppers.
Y'all got some heirloom tomatoes?
No. I have moved to really cherry tomatoes here.
Oh.
And that's because I've noticed, because of the heat, if you grow big tomatoes in Texas,
they burn up.
No, I mean, they will eventually do that, but you either need to
water them a ton,
protect them, or the birds will destroy your tomatoes trying to get the water out of them as it gets
Mm.
hotter, right? Or the squirrels, right? So you either have to like create this fortress against the animals that will try to harvest it. It's not as bad this year because we're so moist so far. So I've got a few, but mostly I grow cherry tomatoes as a result because those don't tend to be as aggressive. Because just don't like a garden that's full of chicken wire protecting my
Yeah,
tomatoes,
right.
right? It's just like
Right.
it's not what I'm going for. Um, I think increasingly it's interesting the way I garden because I build beds and I build them to grow vegetables. And then I slowly transition that bed to like perennials that will just come back with flowers and beauty and build a new bed, right? And just
Mm.
keep migrating out. So I'm as much as I like the vegetables and I like, I'm more interested in just being, again, like managing this sort of ecological system that is growing around my house, getting it to retain moisture better, getting it to have good soil and just be a source of biodiversity in the city.
Yeah.
Um, Partly because it's much nicer to sit in something like that than a big open yard you have to mow all the time.
Heck yeah.
And my goal, my stated goal for my garden, I've got 15 years basically till retirement, is that once I retire, I want the garden developed enough that there's no more mowing.
No more mowing.
It's just beds and paths.
Nice. You could influence me, Grant. I just have the yard. I mow it.
Do you like being out in it?
I like being outside. I love being outside.
Do you like weeding? Do you like See, the thing is like,
Do I like the key components of it?
yeah,
Like folks want to be master pianists, but do you like
Right.
practicing scales? Do you
Right.
like
because
Yeah.
it's interesting because I resist weeding as a good example. Because it's like I'm just gonna sit out there for 2 hours. It's hot. I gotta pull all the plants.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting activity because once I'm in it, I can sit there and weed for like 2 hours, and it's this
Meditation.
beautiful meditative
Yeah.
state. There's lots of things like that in life I've noticed where I resist doing them, like even working out, going for a bike ride or whatnot.
Yeah.
But when I'm into them, it's just like, why did I resist this?
I love the biking, yeah, or even running. It's like the first couple miles are the worst, and then you start to get the
What I like about the garden is that as it takes off, its beauty, the insects coming, the flowers, the
Yeah.
fruits, they become the motivation to remind me to get out there and weed. But the real fruit is the period of time I get to spend out there
right
weeding.
to be in it.
Right. But I got to have that motivation to get me there.
Yeah.
So,
All right. What's our next chapter?
oh man, we're at time. Look
Let's
at that.
wrap it up.
Yeah.
Our next chapter is
Our next chapter is there anything really? Is anything really up to us?
which sounds like free will versus
Yeah.
determinalism. Or
Yeah, do we I mean that's a good way, because I often think of it in like, do we make choices, but is anything really up to us? Like,
is it-
even if we make choices, do our choices matter?
do our choices matter? Ugh.
Because I think if you're going to think about free will, it's not just making choices, it's choices that have real consequence.
Yeah. Oh, last question. Am I a philosopher yet? Which question will I be a philosopher?
When do you get to be a philosopher? I
Yeah.
mean, I think being a philosopher is a state that is defined by a certain kind of activity, not an identity.
So you do it. It's a lifetime of doing it.
Yeah,
It's not like I've done it for
You're
3
doing
days.
philosophy,
So right now I'm a philosopher.
right, and whether you want to carry that identity beyond this moment is up to you. Now, are you getting paid to be a philosopher?
Don't bring money into this.
I mean, that's just like, that's the thing. Like, are
Well,
you a
who knows?
professional philosopher?
This could
Yeah,
this
I mean,
could
it's like,
at some point this could monetize. I
Yeah.
mean, we hope that it does.
I'm going to say something controversial. Jordan Peterson is a philosopher. He's just a bad one.
Oh goodness.
He's just doing it bad.
Yeah.
So that's always the question. It's not like
Great. You looked at the camera when you did
Right,
that. You're
it's-
like right at Jordan.
you're just a bad philosopher.
Oh my goodness. You don't like Jordan Peterson.
I just think he's not a careful thinker.
Yeah.
I think he gets excited about certain thoughts that are tied to his identity and runs with them. And we all do that, but I think he just does it poorly and broadcasts without a lot of good second thinking
Oh
about
my goodness.
what he's doing.
Jordan Peterson, reach out to Grant Potts. We'll have both of you guys on the show, and
I'm glad that like I've passed the phase where every intro to philosophy class or ethics class I teach, there's one guy,
yeah.
and it's always a guy,
Oh yeah,
and he's
it's a guy.
definitely a dude
Oh yeah, he's definitely
who's
a dude.
like, have you encountered Jordan Peterson, the most important philosopher out there?
Oh my
And
goodness.
when that first happened, I was like, oh yeah, let me go investigate this guy. I'm like, wow, this guy's like, he's not a very good thinker.
Yeah.
So
Well,
anyway, yeah,
we're striving to do not
ultimately,
that.
your question shouldn't be, am I a philosopher? Your question should be,
How
am I a good philosopher?
Yeah. Am I a good philosopher?
Am I doing this well?
Yeah. How am I philosophizing?
And
what is the fruit of my philosophy?
Right.
Yours was cultivation. And I think mine's similar. Like what I'm wanting to do is better interact with the world, better like discern, be, that good.
understand better.
Yeah. To understand more, to understand
Understand more.
better, to,
Yeah,
I
Yeah.
think I'm philosophizing. I think I'm a philosopher.
you are. You are.
We got to find some, and everybody noticed Grant wore a neckerchief today.
I did.
That is, I think, that is validation that neckerchiefs
That
do exist.
That is homage to, I made this rant about neckerchiefs being a neologism, and then you sent me this thing, and I was like, no, that's fake news. And then I did my research.
You
and
did your research.
Oh yeah, I looked it up in the OED, and I was like, oh wow, this is like a
You just started a
16th
thing.
century term. Like,
Is it a 16th
yeah,
century term?
it's an old. I think it's kind of outdated. Like people don't use it as much.
Yeah.
But-
Boy Scouts use it. Apparently the Navy uses
Right.
it.
Like I just thought, this was just like, why do we need a term neckerchief for a handkerchief that you wear around your neck?
Well, we need it.
Because apparently we do.
need it. We need it.
And so it is a tribute to being wrong.
Oh.
Because that I think is the most important.
And I think that's a wrap.
Right. That's a wrap.
Yeah, that's a wrap. Thanks.
Thank you.
This has been Phil Phails at Philosophy Book Club with Grant Potts. We've been talking about, where's that book? Hand me that book. We've been talking about philosophy's big questions, comparing Buddhist and Western approaches, edited by Stephen M. Emmanuel. We've been talking about Can Consciousness Be Explained? Tune in next time for, what was it called again? Do I even have a choice? Something like
Right.
that. Do I even have a choice? That's not it, but I'm paraphrasing. Yeah, for more of this. Thank you for watching. Boom!